Hey, buddy. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. It's Monday. And, Mike and I are just bitching and moaning about everything before we get online. And I'm thinking, what, me worry? Let's adopt that Alfred E. Newman attitude and attack the week as though we're grateful to be alive.
Because we need reps.
Yeah, something like that.
My favorite thing, Norm, just to continue that theme, I think that, it's valuable for people to hear this because not every day or every week or every month or even season is going to be your season. And I had a really formative high school football coach. We were incredibly lucky and that he was seeking something, I think, similar to what we seek here, and that, some sense of purpose and fulfillment. And this guy had, gotten to the upper reaches of his athletic career from a football perspective. He had a family, but he had done the whole D1 college stuff, worked in the NFL as coach, and then we were lucky enough for him to come down and want to build a program for us in Johnston County, North Carolina. And something that he said, as we needed to hear it as young men, that has always stuck with me and I think is valuable for anybody that is looking for a little pick-me-up, is that the object is not to just survive, right? You're out, you practice every day, and you're not doing the bare minimum, because when it comes to the time that you need to compete, you're going to do and perform the way that you practice. It's like, but we're not just out here to survive. So even though it feels like I'm trying to survive today, Norm, I think that what you just said about going on offense, we're looking for a little bit of offense. We need reps. So we're going to get out here and compete.
Well, yeah, and and it reminded me, because I'm a nerd, of, Socrates. The point is not simply to live, but to live well. And, the fact of the matter is that consciousness, that thing that we share, that we're relying on now to communicate, it exists on a vast substrate of impulses, designs, desires, and a whole hidden world of data. We are, each of us, infinite specks in a broader universe. And I say that not to pass at what's at seeming profundity, but to recognize the obvious, that when you come to the end of yourself, there's an entire world out there, and you're summoned by faith, or by the wind, as it were, to submit to where you're headed and to get there. And so let's just get there without further ado, because I'm going to start sounding like Marianne Williamson in a minute. And then what? I'm running for president. Feel me? No. Thank you, Marianne. Hey, so, Donald Trump's going to trial soon in the Stormy Daniels case. It looks like that will be numero uno in the criminal trials for Donald Trump. Alvin Bragg, brought the action, and it arises from his covering up of a all too human moment, his dalliance with Stormy Daniels, and his payment to her of money, and apparently his allegedly, at least, his cover up of false, or his use of false business records to cover up those payments. Now, because he did so allegedly in furtherance of a federal crime, that is election interference, this is a felony rather than a misdemeanor, and he faces up to 4 years in prison if convicted. The state is set to begin in the Manhattan courts, the Manhattan criminal courts, on March 25th. It'll be tried before Judge Juan Merchan, Merchan. I have an association with him that I'll never forget. Years ago, I had a case in his chambers involving the so-called Manhattan Madam, Anna Gristina. And he was the presiding judge, and he was difficult and diffident. Let's see how he is in the Trump case. But in Trump's case, I can't help. Call it lawfare. But whether and Merchan has not dismissed the charges yet, and I'm kind of surprised by that, because there are instances in which a statute on its face can suggest that it may have been violated in one way or another. But the application of the statute seems to stretch the statute beyond the norm, beyond what was anticipated, or beyond what federal sentencing guideline drafters might call the heartland. In other words, when a legislative body enacts a penal code, it does so because there is a form of conduct that it wants to prohibit, and it wants to give prosecutors the ability to strike back when that conduct occurs. And so falsifying business records undermines faith and confidence in transactional work, that is, in business relationships between parties, and people can rely to their detriment on falsified documents. And therefore, you want to make sure that people have an incentive to tell the truth. Okay, good. We all should have that incentive, but we're human, all too human, and the will has desires of its own. So we have that, but is it really the case that that disclosing or hiding a payment made to a former porn star out of embarrassment, shame, or whatnot, what was intended by this statute? In other words, who was hurt by the disguising of that, and it certainly didn't affect any future business relations. And then the notion that somehow this needs to be a felony because it amounted to election interference. That just to me seems absolutely crazy. It didn't amount to election interference. It perhaps kept from public view something that Trump. There's no secret about Trump, and that is that he's a philanderer. But I don't think anybody voted for Trump to become Pope. They voted for him to become president. And when he said he could grab women by the pussy and without consequences, I think he was suggesting that he had libidinal issues. So it doesn't come as a surprise to me that the Stormy Daniels papers or payments were disguised. And it doesn't strike me as a felony involving federal election interference within the meaning of this statute for Bragg to prosecute him. So the case is expected to start on March 25th. There should be a verdict by May. And this could be, the first conviction of a former president for a felony. This would not be a disqualifying event. You may be thinking, well, there's that 14th Amendment Section 3 issue, that would disqualify him. No, that disqualification only comes for engaging in insurrection, whatever that means, or offering aid and comfort to an enemy of the United States. Hiding payments for a non-disclosure agreement to your porn star mistress just isn't what's anticipated. So I think this is a much ado about nothing case. I was at dinner last night with some friends, and one of whom, who's an ardent anti-Trumper, said very despondently, I think Trump's going to be elected. I just don't see this as having a material impact on the presidential race at all. Alvin may have thought he was swinging for the fences. Let me shift metaphors. And in a sex case, it's a particularly troubling metaphor. He'd be
It's even
shooting
worse than that.
blanks.
I think it's even worse than that. I think it's just that he had to figure out a way to justify, the work that he was elected to do against Trump to begin with, right? And then the enhancing to a felony there isn't any precedent. There isn't any existing precedent, and to your point, of application of this standard in a fact pattern that even looks remotely close to this, right?
No, and this reminds me of the of a fundamental truth that Harvey Silverglate, a former, perhaps current, I don't know, columnist for the Boston Phoenix, had when he wrote his book called Three Felonies a Day. And the point of the book was to say that, when the Republic was founded, there were maybe a couple score, of federal felonies that prosecutors could charge. You can't even nobody can count the number. Well, I mean, I suppose it's possible. That would be a great topic. Those of you who have Chat GPT-4, here's a challenge for you today. Punch in the following question to AI, because I can't figure it out. I don't have the time. How many potential federal felonies are there? And my hunch is you'll probably come back with somewhere in the range of 10 to 20,000. And when there are that many ways for prosecutors to charge you, and Silverglade's point is there are so many felonies, we each commit 3 a day. What you're giving to prosecutors is the ability to choose when to punish and when not to. They can't punish everything, so they decide to punish some things, and the things they decide to punish are things that they think are important, either for public safety reasons or, as in the case of Donald Trump, for political reasons. So I find this first prosecution of Donald Trump for the Stormy Daniels thing to be tawdry, but unnecessary, and it speaks poorly of Alvin Bragg. Now, of course, it could be that he and Fawny are heating the sheets at some motel midway between Midtown Manhattan and Atlanta, Georgia. But I don't want to defame anybody. Maybe they're just a couple of ambitious people, on their way up. Dawn McNeil asks, "Will the judge wear a pussy hat to court?" I doubt it. I doubt it. He was certainly, I know in the Anna Christina case, he certainly was discomfited by the allegations, and she ended up with a pretty good deal.
Well,
Uh,
for judicial economy's sake, I feel like that may be redundant.
yeah, no kidding. Hey, here we are 4 years later. If you're listening to this and you have a pulse, you survived COVID. If you're listening to this and you don't because you've died, please send us a note so that we know how to communicate with you ourselves, because that would be profoundly interesting. Mike, where were you when you first heard about the pandemic?
When I first heard about it, I was, still here where I am geographically, but I have an interesting, memory around this. It's actually, the day the world closed was a few days.
March 13th, 2020.
That's
Yeah.
right. It was a Friday the 13th for those of you that remember that. And where I was advising several clients, at the beginning of this as to how to begin decelerating and shuttering their tap rooms, right? Their on-premise activity, in the beer community, right there in the beer industry, particularly in more densely populated areas. People were taking this very seriously, as was I. And, I remember, the irony of the moment was that probably the more conservative of my clients, if I could say so, on the political spectrum, were the most active in trying to make initial preparations because they were just fiscally responsible, right?
Mm.
And those that were on the other end were trying to, squeeze out as much normal activity from their business because remember, this was St. Patty's Day weekend as well that year in 2020. So people were trying to get that weekend's worth of sales. They were willing to sacrifice the greater public health, right, at writ large, over something unknown for that weekend's worth of spoils at the bars. So I'll never forget that feeling a bit, detached from those who would project their virtue, right, all over the place, but then also just be willing to stare down something that had been, at that point, called a pandemic by the World Health Organization and say, "Nah, you could get these extra sales out though, right? And then we can close on Monday," which is what a lot of people did. So I haven't forgotten that. Any of you that are watching or share this, I haven't forgotten that about the craft beer industry at all. I'll never forget that.
So my recollections of the pandemic, and I guess the takeaway, you're wondering why we're talking about this, because it's the fourth anniversary. It's Monday. We had a busy weekend, couldn't come up with something else. But the other reason is, let's mark this time and ask what the pandemic did to us. And what it did is it injected a level of fear into politics that we hadn't seen before. And pandemics occur from time to time in world history. And the post pandemic period is usually one characterized by radical social change, because fear undoes and unstrings people and yields reactions to ordinary data that are extraordinary, aka the George Floyd case. But perhaps more about that in a minute. I knew something was afoot in December or early January
That's
of
right.
19 or 20, when I saw a news story that the Chinese in Wuhan had, within a matter of days, created a hospital that was capable of caring for 10,000 people. And I thought, wow, I mean, that is a significant undertaking. It's being done for a reason. And then as reports trickled out, and we got to the point of March, I was in Austin, Texas. I was working at Alex Jones's facility in InfoWars when it was obvious that by week's end the world was going to be shut down, and it was unclear to me whether the flight that I had home was going to be canceled. And I certainly didn't want to stay in Austin, Texas, and die with the zombies down there. So I remember finding an Uber driver who had family in Rochester, New York, I think it was. No, Westchester, New York. And I said, look, if the flight's closed, you want to go home? Well, I won't pay you your full fare, but let's drive across country, because I'd rather die in close environs. And that was really my state of mind, that something in the world was occurring that was going to kill me, that had the perspective to destroy me. And it was terrifying. Yeah, I recall, for months, wondering, looking at news reports. Remember the breathless reports from Cuomo, and then Fauci became a personality, and then the statistics arose, and you could see fatalities around the world. In the end, millions of people did die as a result of COVID, and apparently it still lingers. I saw a story this morning that right now, I think there have been 10,000 deaths due to COVID already in 2024. Recently, there were 21,000 people hospitalized. I don't know whether that's extraordinary or not. I'm not a public health professional.
Or whether it's
No,
or what or how to even read the data. I mean, here we are. I think that's the overarching point here is that I don't know that we're any better as a society from what we subjected ourselves to pursuant to these sort of authoritarian style lockdowns or some sort of and we talked about the emergence of the public health state and the fact that the fact that governors in power sort of rolled up and as quick as we've ever seen and as probably as quick as we will ever see again, at least in the next few generations. I mean, we saw the consolidation of political power occur at rates that I don't think that people really fully appreciated until probably about right now.
well,
This
you
is
know,
the face on the screen here. Dr. Mandy Cohen is who I had to look at for the entirety of that saga here in North
are you still
Carolina.
interested in women after that experience?
I don't know that there's any connection between that. I just look at this and it's like such a hollow representation of what we would ascribe competence to and
My
trust.
name is Mandy. I'm a hologram. How can I serve you? Well, you can't. I mean, I'll take a coffee to go and I'm out of here, you know?
But I do think we are better in one way, and it is that we have humans are adept at a number of things, but one of them is recognizing, sort of in group, out group preferences. And from what I can tell, those of us, even if we disagree on a number of other things, one thing we can agree on is that meritocracy is really the only saving grace of our society. Those that can figure out the truth and then apply solutions to complex problems, or at least galvanize or rally people to do that, are the most important in our society. And those that are just willing to let people flounder, scare them to death, push them in their homes, and then try and rewrite history to say that they didn't fuck it up completely. Those are the ones that we don't really need to put trust and faith into it anymore, or the institutions or mechanisms by which those sorts of frauds were perpetuated.
You know,
I'm as cynical as I've ever been now, I guess.
over the weekend, I recorded another episode of our con law series. I'd been away from it for a while, and I'm working my way, through the Constitution of the United States, fourth edition, Stokes and Paulson. These are 15-minute interludes, and I'm was doing the reading for the next section, which will be on the separation of powers, where when I came upon the following language, which I think is of note in the post-pandemic era. A scheme of government like ours, no doubt at times feels the lack of power to act with complete, all embracing, swiftly moving authority. No doubt a government with distributed authority, subject to be challenged in the courts of law, at least long enough to consider and adjudicate the challenge, labors under restrictions from which other governments are free. It has not been our tradition to envy such governments. I know no more impressive words on this topic than that of just Mr. Justice Brandis, and this comes from Felix Frankfurter's concurrence in the Youngstown Steel case, which was decided in 1952. In that case, President Eisenhower issued an executive order to seize the steel mills, which were about to be shut down as a result of a labor strike, and he did so to keep the mills rolling, so that we could have war production. And he tried to argue that this was part of his inherent executive authority, and the Supreme Court said no, 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 no. So Frankfurter goes on to quote Brandis: the doctrine of separation of powers was adopted by the Convention of 1787 not to promote efficiency, but to preclude the exercise of arbitrary power. The purpose was not to avoid friction, but by means of the inevitable friction incident to the distribution of the governmental powers among three departments, to save the people from autocracy. And I think the pandemic crystallized and focused our attention on what we're prepared to do for for a sense of safety. And a lot of litigation went on around the country, testing the limits of state and federal emergency powers when people wanted a quick, decisive, and centralized response to this public health emergency. And the desire for it remains. And I think the challenge of the American constitutional republic is to remain committed to a limited government for the sake of liberty, even in the face of terror, even in the face of something that has the tendency to destroy you. Because, as we said earlier today in a different context, the point is not to live, but to live well. And there has to be a limit to how far you're willing, or what you're willing to do to settle for the sense of safety. There has to come a point, I think, where you say with Martin Luther, as Luther did at the door to Wittenberg Castle at the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, "Here I stand, I can do no other." So to me, the pandemic raised the pandemic, and our reaction to it is the real authoritarian threat in the United States. Whenever people start saying, "Oh, Trump's an authoritarian, he's attacking our democratic norms," I viewed Trump as the canary in the coal mine, saying, "Wait a minute, let's not take virtue too seriously. Let's remember that ours is a government of limited powers, and let's remember that in the United States, inefficiency isn't a bug; it's a feature." So.
Yeah, yeah, well said.
Jack Smith, Jalapeno Jack. Um, the appointment clause. What's going on here?
So we introduced this on Friday, and I think, I asked the question of you, what the hell is the appointments clause? But we're talking about, fundamentally, Trump's legal team's latest challenge, in these series of cases in the classified documents case is to challenge the legitimacy of the appointment of Jack Smith, a special prosecutor, to even bring the case, pursuant to the appointments clause of the Constitution. And that is that the United States Department of Justice, by and through Merrick Garland, appointing special counsel, special prosecutor Jack Smith, was in error, and illegitimate, and therefore disqualifying of the lawsuit in full.
So let's talk about what it means to say something is an X clause within the United States Constitution. It's not as though you'll ever find an index at the back of it that
That's right.
lists all the clauses in there. That what the Constitution does is it addresses a fundamental problem, and that is it tries to give an account for the nature of political authority in the United States by setting out the metes and bounds within which those who exercise power do so with authority. And the difference between power and authority, obviously, is any knucklehead with a gun can get you to do something out of fear. A person with authority can get you to do so for different reasons, presumably because you respect their authority or recognize his or her ability to act authoritatively. So the federal constitution sets up, or at least initially set up at the time of the founding, a government of limited powers, a federal government of limited powers. The powers reposed in the federal government were enumerated. That is, they were numbered. And there was a great debate at the time of the founding about whether the courts or the federal government had any unnumbered or unenumerated powers. These are the so-called implied powers. And a lot of the dance in constitutional law in the last 250 years, they think of the Constitution as an accordion-like thing. Those implied powers are smaller or greater depending on the era and the exigencies. In the appointment clause, basically says that for senior officials or for administrators, judges, and those doing the significant work of government, the president appoints individuals to serve in those roles, and then the Senate confirms those. So the separation of powers doctrine is designed to prohibit a president from exerting too much power. And so in the Jack Smith case, the question then becomes, is he a principal or a subsidiary officer? In other words, is he an officer who needs to be appointed or by the president and confirmed by the Senate, or can his bosses, who have been appointed and confirmed, toss the ball to him? And how that line gets drawn will have consequences. So in the in the in the documents case in Florida, where Trump is held or is accused rather to have taken documents that belonged to the federal government against the government, against the law, and held them, at his estate. A special prosecutor has been appointed, and the case is pending before Aileen Cannon. I don't recall where, maybe in Florida. And so two groups have filed briefs to challenge whether Smith has any authority at all, because he wasn't he doesn't he wasn't appointed by Congress, and he wasn't, or by the president, he wasn't confirmed by the United States. He was a creature of Merrick Garland, a creature of Merrick Garland, and did Garland have the authority? I don't know what, Mike, I don't have a gut sense on this. I don't have enough experience litigating these claims. I do know that the issue of special prosecutors has been controversial. The Special Prosecutor Act expired, I believe, in the 1970s. And now, when we have a need for a prosecutor to bring an action, they are typically appointed.
So
Sometimes by
the
attorney
intro
general.
to this article by A.R. Hoffman, I wanted to bring this up because you said you don't have a general sense about this, but he AR appears to. So I'll read this for the audio only, but also for those that are streaming. Judge Eileen Cannon, who presides over the Mar-a-Lago documents case, appears open to President Trump's argument that special counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutionally appointed, a possibility that could rock the prosecution of the 45th president. The judge has telegraphed her curiosity about the disqualification of the special counsel in an unusual docket note. The question has hung over the special counsel from the start. Judge Cannon, though, ventured that two briefs supporting Mr. Trump's position that Mr. Smith's appointment was defective, quote, bring to the court's attention relevant matter that may be of considerable help to the court in resolving the cited pretrial motions. So, according to AR, the court is at least has an appetite to at least get this issue fully resolved now, right? Which I
Well, I
think is
think it
important.
has to, because I mean, one of the briefs said that the special prosecutor Smith has no more authority to prosecute the president than does Big Bird, or some randomly selected person, because he is simply a prosecutor, and that was asked from within the Justice Department to step up. I think they take the contention that he should. Most U.S. attorneys and members of the U.S. Attorney's Office are appointed by the president, and they get an appointment, they're confirmed, and then they do their job. Smith was appointed to be a prosecutor, and he represented the United States before the International War Crimes Tribunal. I'm of the opinion, looking at this from afar, that he meets the appointment clause criteria. That I don't think they needed to bring in a prosecutor specially appointed to perform this task. The Justice Department is an entity composed of hundreds, if not thousands, of lawyers, all of whom have been vetted, appointed, and confirmed, and they can go about doing their job and manage the way in which they do their job without interference from other branches of government. Does Smith, as Trump's prosecutor, require a special appointment? I'm hard pressed to see why, and nothing in the discussion of the briefs that I've seen thus far answers that question.
Well, and of course, Jack Smith tends to make the argument that you are, Mr. Hoffman, followed up by reporting that Jack Smith argued to Judge Cannon on Thursday that not only should she be rejecting Trump's claim of presidential immunity, but everything else is a quote strategic effort for delay.
Mm.
So this is both sides are trenched on this issue. They have been, but of course, what I think is fascinating about this is that this in total appears to be part of a more global counteroffensive from the Trump legal camp, right? If we take for consideration what's going on in Georgia with the prosecution there, what's happening in New York now that Trump's legal team is putting pressure on District Attorney Alvin Bragg in the hush money payments case, right, with respect to the jailing of members of the Trump organization pursuant to weird plea deals, and now this, right? Trump has raised the presidential immunity claim, long before now, but is now attacking the integrity of the classified documents case and special counsel Jack Smith's presence there. And there's no doubt about this, Norm, that if he is even mildly successful in challenging the legitimacy of Jack Smith's presence here, he will do the same in the DC case.
Mike, put up the language from the Sun story on the appointments clause itself, since we've got this question, what is the appointments clause? Let's locate it in the Constitution and show people the language. This is when we have this thing called the Constitution, its words matter. And the words that it used suggest that there are limits on what it can apply to.
Sorry, everybody.
That's all right. We're having tech issues here. That's on brand.
So here we are. This top paragraph. That section of the national parchment ordains that the president, quote, here it is, shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law. And so the argument here is what you've already gone through, Norm, is that that Jack Smith, as special prosecutor, is an inferior officer of the United States, not a principal officer, and would thus require Senate to confirm him in the position that he's in. That is the nuts and bolts of the Trump legal team's argument here.
Well, let's see how it works. There's no obvious constitutional answer to that for me. The Trump team is not to be faulted for raising it, but if I were a judge, my inclination would be that he's not so high up the food chain that he has to be appointed that any old prosecutor could do, and that the Attorney General of the United States has the right to appoint somebody from within his office to do that. No matter how august the cause, all people are equal before the law, and any stuffed shirt of a prosecutor could handle the case. So, folks, a low energy end to Monday morning because it's just going to be that kind of creaky old week. But we'll be back tomorrow morning. Thanks for listening. Mike, how do people find us?
Every weekday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time, on Rumble, on YouTube, and on X at LawPod Daily. Most of you are coming to us today from X, which I'm finding to be a more and more hospitable platform for law and legitimacy. So thank you for being here. You can also find us audio only after every day stream on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, wherever you find premium podcasts. Norm, I will see you tomorrow morning, my man. I'm going to run off and play lawyer, as you like to say.
As I am. I'll see you all tomorrow, folks. Be well. AMF, yo-yo.
AMF, yo-yo. See you tomorrow.